think we're gonna get started. Hopefully, maybe we'll have one or two more people maybe meander in. We've got a few items on the agenda tonight. We really got some great information. So Blake from Prairie Engineering is on the call with us, and he's very gracious to give us a little bit more of his time. And we just got lots of good information, and then I'm hoping that after we go through kind of some of the summaries, that you guys might be able to ask him some questions. He's, the expert and engineer when it comes to mechanical things, so it's good that he's able to join us, because a lot of the questions you guys have are, above me, and I think this will help shed some clarity, but good information, and we spent the better part of a few hours around the school and checking things out, and I think they have a pretty good idea. So with that, I'll share my screen. And so we do have Travis is online, Blake's online, we have a couple of the folks online, and there might be one more person joining from Icon that might as well be online, Lee, the project manager. So just quickly, or not quickly, I guess, but just, it's been a few weeks. Is there anything that we need to know as a committee that you're hearing from community members, from friends, family, when you tell them that you're going and spending, hours in the school after 7 o'clock at night, and they ask you what's going on, what are their responses? It'd be good if, just the updates, so we all know what people are thinking.
Other than hiring you guys, we haven't accomplished a lot. That's a negative if you're a community member wondering what we're doing with these. Be nice to have some actionables.
Yep.
I think there's always like financial at the root of this. Is what's this going to cost?
Yeah.
So, until we can't say, well, we can do it for half price or this price, or we're not going to do this. We are going to do this. Everybody kind of just wants to know what kind of dollar amounts are we looking at. That's what I've been asked is, what's this going to cost us this time around? And, I have no idea.
Yeah, no, and we've got dollar amounts in minutes, so, and the delay, and we really appreciate the, pushing back, one, to kind of renew that we needed a couple more meetings with you guys, and then two, just for us to get, I think meeting again without having our folks from Prairie spend the time in here and us have some dialogue and some narrative. I just think we could have met, and it would have been the same of pushing things back and forth. And this is really, I think we'll be able to, I think there will be clear direction at the end of this. I think that's tonight. What else? What?
I think.
All right. Okay. And that's fair. We haven't put a lot of information out, but we just, again, want to make sure that we take that time. So there has been some interesting developments as the state has closed session up in Bismarck, specifically House Bill 1176. And what's great is that, that was some pretty amazing property tax relief for primary residents only. But it was a good increase, but there was actually kind of a side effect to that we'll kind of talk about a little bit. And I don't know, and if you want to chime in or,
sure.
Yeah.
So it's $1,600 credit for residential. Unfortunately, it wasn't for our farmland, anything ag. But I guess it's a start. At least that's what I believe their feelings are out there. But some unintentional things are, and maybe they were intentional, is that it caps the growth of political subs, and it also caps the schools. So it's capped at 3% on any of our levies, and that's in dollars. So if our valuation goes up, we only have a 3% raise that we can do for our dollars. So that would be hindering. Another thing is it moved back any kind of a vote to have approval to, you can only do it at your primary and at your general election. So the next time that we could have any kind of a referendum vote would be in June of 2026. So the crazy thing is, in fact, Shannon and I were just listening today that obviously your primary and your general come during even years, so you can vote in the spring and then in the fall, or the summer and in the fall of even years is the only time that you can go to a vote. So all of the schools that are, looking at any kind of construction or need to do anything with their facilities, they're gonna be hindered by the time when they can vote. Now, some of the schools already have their votes ready to go before August 1st. So like Valley's voting in June and they'll be fine. But if Valley's doesn't pass in June, they won't get to vote again until June of 2026. And so some of the things that are coming up across the state are, questions from construction companies. So if everybody's voting at the exact same time and schools are all rolling around or anything like that, where are the bids gonna be able to go, or what's gonna happen with that? So they're all gonna be, at the same time. So it's gonna cause bids to go up and costs to go up, because if you got 5 schools that are going for a referendum and they're putting out bids in January, how accurate are your bids gonna be? Especially when there's, only a few companies that do it, so your competition is gonna be high in there, so.
I mean, it's just wild. We're getting to a point where we're actually getting competitive bidding. And, in North Dakota, we're already held to the construction season. And this is just gonna amplify it even more, because now it's once every 2 years, every school that needs to do something is all gonna be funneled into that, 4 or 5 month window. And then everything's gonna end up being bid out of this. It's just, it's a little crazy. And I feel like, we had some conversations with, different lobbying entities that had talked to the people that were part of the bill, and they didn't realize what they were even doing. We actually did put a call in to the governor's office, and Travis may not even know this, but I actually did get a call back, but I was on the line, so now I'm playing phone tag. But I shared the issue of just how much this is gonna cost taxpayers, and I don't think anyone realized it. And yeah, to get a call back, I was pretty impressed, so hopefully that'll lead to something. So maybe tomorrow I'll have something to update folks on. But it's he's the director of finance, I think, for the governor's office, or someone is the person that called me back. So before we get too far, actually, I probably should have stopped. And I don't know if we want to just do some quick introductions of the people that are online. Just there's some new faces, and maybe, Travis, I don't think anyone's sad that he's not here. I think the meeting will run much better. But yeah, he's online.
Happy to be joining in via my vehicle right now. So perfect.
He's got this opinion that his son's last baseball game is important. I don't know. You guys don't get it. But yeah, next, I don't know, Blake, that'd be great. And Jeremy, I didn't know you're on, but that's awesome. If you guys could introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Blake with Prairie Engineering. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because I'm using some technology at home that I've never had to, trying to make it so you guys won't hear my 3-year-old when she finally gets up here and realizes where I am. So I'm a mechanical engineer at Prairie Engineering in Bismarck. So.
And I'm Jeremy with Prairie Engineering. I'm on the electrical side. It was both Blake and I were at the facility a few weeks ago, and we're the ones who walked around with Travis and Kyle.
Kelly's committee member. I think we all know she's just online. And she was well, right? Oh yeah, of course. So yeah, thank you guys. Really appreciate you being on. So the reason we're talking about this House bill is that, Jamestown was in a situation where I'd say they're a little bit ahead of you guys, and they're kind of scrambling to basically call for a vote in the next week. And because they don't want to wait a year. So I just want you guys to know, it's never an urgency beyond what the community's urgency is, but depending on the way things play out in the next couple of days, or what we hear maybe from some of these other entities, and I don't think we think it's realistic to say that we're gonna vote right away, but we just want everyone to know you know, our hopes of maybe having like an October vote, I think are gone. So it's either you have to make a decision really quickly and potentially have a vote in August, or it's June of next year. There are some different funding methods, and I think when we talk dollars, you'll see that those methods are potentially on the table. But there's lots of repercussions for that. But just want you guys to know that this is something that the state kind of handed us, and it snuck in under the radar. We didn't realize. I don't think anyone realized what was going on until after it was done. So it was just one extra little caveat.
The 3%?
So sorry, no, this is the limitation for local entities to have special elections for votes, which basically just means we have to wait till a primary or a general. And I'd say, you know, the decade that I've been doing this, we have never gone on a primary or general ever. And I'd also say there's people that would say, oh, you're just sneaking votes in. I don't know of a vote that's ever been snuck in when you have to get super majority in North Dakota, like where people know how to communicate and people share their opinions. Like there's never been an accidental pass, you know, and there's some people that think that that happens, and that's unfortunate. But all that does is mean that school districts are now being forced into this position, and there's no way this doesn't cost folks more money. So hopefully we can only have to bear this for 1 year, and then in the session in 27, they can fix it. That's the only thing that's honestly keeping me going, because otherwise this like changes our business and everything, because to think every school can only do something across the state every other year, it's wild to think the repercussions and how far this will go. But it's real right now. So as you guys think about it, this isn't us trying to say we need to make a decision, but unfortunately there is a point. No, okay. All right, so we'll just cut into it. If it's all right with you guys, Blake and Jeremy, I'm going to kind of share this crazy summary that I took many pages from them of I would say a heavy draft. What did you guys call it? A 50% draft of what their assessment and report would be. And I took that 50% assessment that's multi-pages and put it into a 1-page kind of, and just got the dollars. And we can talk narrative. And what's great is that Blake and Jeremy are on. So the second you have a question, we're just going to hand it over to them. But we can talk numbers, which I think is really important. And at the end of the day, you know, as I had shared and Travis and I had shared before, and we had a great dialogue with Jeremy and Blake, you know, I don't think they were under any, I don't think they were entertaining the notion of the extensive replacement that was shown from our first walk around the school. It was immediate that like things could be done in a different way. And so I think I'll do a poor job of showing that, and then they will explain that better. Tried to make the text bigger. Folks read this a little bit. Yeah, I'll make it even bigger. All right, so the way we've got it broken down is into immediate needs, and then I would call it immediate budget recommendations. So these are things that, you know, in Blake and Jeremy's eyes are items, and ours as well, that maybe it's not, you have to do it right now, but you should be budgeting for it right now. And some of that overlaps into intermediate and long-term needs, 3 to 10 years. And actually, before we even get into all this good stuff.
Can we get a copy of this? Or do you have a copy?
It's not final yet. So that's why this is like, when their report is done, you will have it, absolutely. And I'll show you the draft of it. But again, we just don't want to give you something that's not final, but they'll answer any questions that you have. But before we jump into that, just a quick little, we looked at, you know, I would say we took a stab independently at the spaces that maybe if you had to replace the high school, and you would understand that you would lose a huge amount of square footage. You have over 40,000 square feet. And if we said, okay, what's the bare minimum that maybe you could get by? Again, this is us talking internally without any input from you guys, but just saying, you know, that's 12 classrooms, a fax room, a band choir room, an office suite, you know, could you replace most of what's happening in the high school? We think you could for about 16,000 square feet. You'll see the total below, and then you'll see the grossing. That's the grossing factor. That's adding hallways, wall thicknesses, mechanical space, bathrooms. Just when we're at this high level, you got to just pick the room and then a grossing factor to get a good number. We think you could replace the high school for about 9 million if you just built these spaces. So still, in our opinion, you still don't want to do that because you're walking away from 43,000 square feet, and outside of the mechanical system and the windows, 43,000, I would say pretty good square feet, on the bathrooms. But so just to prove the point though, I mean, you could stick that in the parking lot right there very easily. I mean, that a 2-story addition right there would fit perfect. And you could walk away from all of these other things, and that's inclusive of mechanical systems, inclusive of everything. But I don't know that that's the right idea, but we want to, again, just make sure that you have that number in the back of your mind. Okay, so file that away. So then I'm going to go through here. So if we look at our immediate needs, and I wonder if can we minimize some of the stuff on the side just so that we can make it bigger. Folks.
Yeah, go down and
Get there.
yeah.
There we go. There we go. Is that a little bit better? A little bit bigger. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So let's just start here. So there's a few different ways to address the chiller, and a direct replacement and reuse of the tower, in my opinion, and I'll just pause after 1 second, is the one that I placed in this for cost purposes. There's less expensive ways and more expensive ways to kind of attack that. And maybe even before I go any further, Blake, do you want to jump in on your narrative, or do you want me to kind of read what you wrote, or?
It's probably easier for them to understand if you explain it, and then if I hear something, I will jump. I'm not shy. I'll jump in and talk. So
I'm going to pull up your narrative. So we're going to flip back and forth between narrative and cost. That's okay, guys. Share. This one's got my notes on, which is fine. Okay, so if we look at the fan, here, hold on 1 second, guys. Okay, so cooling tower, hang on, guys.
the chiller was above the cooling tower, just so you know.
Yeah, thanks.
There,
There we
water
go.
cooled chiller.
There we go. So there's a couple different ways that you guys can address this. You know, as he said, the water chiller is in pieces and hasn't been in service for a while. So you could get a used chiller, which could be an option, but this would be determined based on availability, you know, specifically working with manufacturers. There potentially would be no factory warranty, and the chiller would be used from its previous owner. So we wouldn't know how well it was maintained. That is always an option that we can entertain if there's availability. An air-cooled chiller could also be installed on the outside and piped in. This would require the switch from water to glycol, and then air-cooled units could be used to maintain cooling, and then you wouldn't need the tower at all. So there's a couple different ways to go there, and let's just go to the summaries. Here we go. There we go. There we go. So we could do a 1-for-1 replacement of the cooling tower, or of the chiller, and then reuse the cooling tower. And they're thinking that, so this is a probable opinion of cost. These aren't bids, but again, this is their jobs and this is our jobs. And so we're willing to say it's going to be in this neck of the woods. You could go to an air-cooled chiller, again, size to be a 1-to-1 replacement, and that could be a little bit less. Or you could go to an air-cooled chiller and then incorporate the gyms, the air handlers, or size for the gym and the air handlers, and then provide splits for within the high school. And so then that would allow it to be separate from the cooling system. And you can see that cost would be a little bit more. So 270, 150 for the chiller, and then assuming that all of the slabs controls included those costs. So go ahead.
So like, in this example, the Cadillac version would be like $420,000, Mike?
I would say yes. Is that fair to say, Blake?
If Cadillac version means option 3, they're all three of these are just different ways to get cooling into your building. I wouldn't say any of them is any number of ways better than the other, being honest. So
If they're all kind of the same, why would we spend 420,000 on option 3 and roughly, 280,000 on 1 and 2?
I think the goal is to provide you options, just different ways to attack it. I don't know, but like,
yeah, that's exactly it. This was intended as different to just so you can see the different ways that we could do this. And I know while we were doing our walkthrough, split systems did get brought up. So I decided to throw that estimate in there.
In your opinion, what's just the best of these 3 options? What is the best?
For most schools, an air-cooled chiller is probably the best option. It's easier to maintain. It's easier to get people that will work on it if it gets something that's outside of your maintenance staff's capabilities, and it doesn't take up a footprint inside your building. So I'd say option 2, if it was my choice.
It's also one less piece of equipment to maintain since you do not need the cooling tower.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that number 2 option for simplicity and people to work on. Those are all new prices then I'm assuming, and they said on that option 2, if you did that air cooled outside, you're kind of roughing in some concrete, and I mean, I know we're not perfect numbers here, something too, but that's kind of dropping cost you're roughly thinking. But then these are all new prices,
yeah,
I'm assuming?
new prices, right?
Okay.
Yep, these are all based on brand new chillers. I was not able to get any information on used chillers, but it's still an option. It's tough to get. A lot of manufacturers don't keep a huge stock of those, and when they do get them, they generally leave. They don't want to sit on them, so they get rid of them really quick.
On considering the what's labeled as controls, is that just replacing what's there, like any type of valves? I know there's a lot of valves that are gonna need to be addressed before that thing is turned back on, that are pretty well toast, but is that any updating controls? Because I know we mentioned earlier in some of our talks, if we wanted to switch from heating to cooling, if we could somehow automate that system, is that kind of roughly in there? Or that's a little more add-on?
That's roughly in there, as best I could do without doing a design and then doing an opinion of cost on that design. You do have a fairly complicated system, but it's just a few valves. I just need to wrap my head around that a lot better. But that controls that I have indicated would be the controls you would need to allow this to work at least equivalently to what you had.
And there is a separate line item on the summary for creating centralized control where it all comes back. And I think that's something that you guys would really want.
We're set up pretty good for technology wise that we could probably add to. We stay with the same system, right? For the most part, ish.
They're all 3 on different systems.
They are.
Yeah. So that's something where I think they recommend we reach out to Johnson Controls, talk to them, right? Because I think that's through most of your systems. And I mean, even if it's modern, if they speak different languages, it's still tricky. Is that?
Yeah, at the very least, there would be a lot of value in having one central system that could at least tell you alarms that are happening in all of your systems.
And then just touch on that number 3 again one more time. That's tough. I'm at a bad angle.
Yeah, all good. So yeah, the air cooled with the split systems and still with the chiller. And that's where it would mirror the split systems that they have already. Is that correct?
So you're adding to the number 2 then. You're switching over to an air chill.
Yeah.
Yeah. So number 3 is a smaller chiller, a chiller that would only be sized for your gyms and a few big loads. It would remove all of the fan coil loads. The fan coils are what are supposed to be cooling your classrooms in the high school. And you'd switch your high school classrooms into a split. They would each room would have its own split unit. I would not recommend a VRF system like you have in the other two parts of your building. They're difficult to maintain. B, they're proprietary and only certain people can work on them. The split systems I'm talking about are 2-ton single split units that any HVAC tech would be able to work on. So we've seen those get used to pretty good success in rural communities because there probably is someone within 30 miles that can actually help you with it if something goes wrong.
Yeah, I noticed it says 27 systems. I thought we visited earlier. There's 52, 56. So how does that equate to?
So I quickly counted the amount of fan coils you have in your classrooms in that high school. And I based that off of drawing that's not the most legible. It's a pretty old document, but I counted, I would put 27 systems in, and that wouldn't include, you probably have 7 or 8 in your hallways. That why would you cool a hallway if all the classrooms around it are cool? The interior of your building would track with that, right? So that number may not be 100% perfect, but I left those, like, assumes 27 systems and 130-ton chiller, so that you can see basically if you add another split system, it's 10 grand a system. That's kind of what that's there for.
I appreciate that. And just, yeah, and, you know, they're working with the information that we've given them and understanding that, you know, we're not ready to go into design yet. So it's kind of like we need guidance, but we also don't necessarily want to pay engineers to spend 2 months and design it perfectly.
I just had one more too. On those air-cooled chillers, I know the discussion has been brought up about noise and possible location that has been talked about in the past. Have you had any troubles with that from any of the schools you've installed it at, noise-wise?
I haven't, and there are ways to address that. There's accessories for the chillers you can order that knock down the noise a little bit. And what helps the most is typically you don't run it like you turn half your building off in the evenings. And then towards the evenings in the summer, you normally don't have huge basketball games in your gyms. So when anyone is in their houses that might be across the street, the chiller won't be running typically. So that is a good concern, but
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. So to address the piping, you know, Blake had a great point in that, you know, it all has kind of exceeded its useful life. It should all be replaced, but, you know, it didn't seem feasible that it would be replaced in one summer anyway. So it's not something that makes a whole lot of sense to try to budget it and get it all in the project, when it could be something where you break off as much as you can. And it could be something where you do it over several years. I think the thought was, you know, $1 million to maybe $1.5 million in total expense. But if that's something where you do a little bit at a time, you do it over a few years, you do bigger pieces, but something that, you know, if there's a bigger renovation project, it could make sense to do more, but also something where, you know, if we're trying to get something done, we shouldn't let that stop us. And maybe Blake, if you wanted to add to that, or.
No, that's a pretty good way to say it. If you're not going to touch your elementary school for renovation, I mean, that piping's functional. You might have leaks develop in the future, but That's just a, for instance, if you're replacing some pipe in your high school, you don't necessarily have to do it in the elementary and vice versa. There are newer parts of your building, like the 2011, I want to say, is when the newer gym was added, or they repiped some of it. Some of the piping won't need it, but most of that original stuff, you should start thinking about replacing it. And I mean, there's a pretty big swath there, 50,000 to 550. That's assuming the 50,000 would just be replacing what's in the mechanical room. And then the bigger number is once you start branching out, and where do you stop? Where do you start? And it's just trying to help set up a budget for that.
Thanks to folks.
Can I rewind just 1 second on number 3 again? So your little mini, your split units, so you can heat or cool between each room then? One room could be cooling and the next room could be heating?
Yes, they would be completely independent. You'd have 27 outdoor condensing units that we'd have to find a spot for.
And this includes the electrical that it would be needed for all these units?
I was just gonna chime in here. These are only mechanical costs right now. We haven't been able to get into the electrical costs because the electrical side tails the mechanical side. And once we get all the options kind of hammered out and maybe some decisions made on the directions you want to go, we can look at the electrical costs and what the impacts are.
Yeah, when you get to, you'll see on our summary, electrical is just, there's not a number yet, because we have to make some determinations before they can do that next step. Good question, though. Okay, so, piping, so fuel boiler, so replacing the fuel boiler, 1-to-1 cost about 175,000. You know, controls, are in that thought. So one of the things that we talked about and we looked at was just what you're using fuel and what you're using electricity and how you want to maintain that. And being that some of the items are past their useful life, but at the same point, you're only using some of your secondary heat in the buffer months. It comes down to what makes more sense if you want to spend the money to add to the electrical boiler capacity rather than replacing the oil boiler. Does that make sense?
Is that electric was relatively new in that last
Yeah.
7 years?
6 or 7.
Yeah. So if you look at both the high school and the elementary, the thought would be to replace both of those 1-to-1, $175,000 for the fuel boilers. All right, next piece, and this is all will be on one sheet, but again, we'll just go through so we have some of the narrative. The central automation system, so that's the thing that I just briefly talked about, where we would try to loop everything in together. Blake had mentioned where you could get alerts, something wasn't functioning, or there was something that was out of parameters. You know, so as we shifted everything to new controls, to spend the little bit of money to get it all talking. Any other functions I'm missing, Blake?
No, I think you hit it on the head there. That 25,000 that I have in that budget would get a central system installed. It would talk to your phones. You could tell whoever it wants to call for alarms. That would get you quite a few alarm points. And you could begin controlling equipment in your central plants with that. And then the idea there would be, it gives you a basis to start from. Like every year you could budget to take over another floor or something and keep going from there. So.
And then assuming, you know, as you guys have been, is just, you know, to keep the preventative maintenance up, to keep replacing the parts as you can. Because what we don't want to do is, you know, allocate all your maintenance dollars to a project like this because you need those maintenance dollars to keep everything up. I would say a mistake that other districts make that I don't recommend is bonding against 100% of their building fund so they can do a project and then something breaks and they have no way to pay for it. And then it comes down to, do we pay teachers or do we fix something? And I'm not a big fan of that. All right, so if I take these immediate recommendations and let's go to my sheet again, now that we've kind of talked about this a little bit. And add a little bit more. Okay. So understanding that, oh, you know what, one thing I don't know that we had a cost for was pneumatic controls at the high school plant. Was that already in the thoughts?
That's what that 25 grand is,
Oh, that
is
one.
just to at least begin addressing so that you start getting rid of that. Yep.
So if you looked at our immediate needs, replacement of the chiller. So let's say we went to that option 2, so that's 275. So the 285. We're assuming, so these costs are already in, so replace oldest portion of the high school piping. So I just took the biggest dollar amount and you'll see why, but let's just bear with me. I just put the biggest amount in there. Let's just assume worst case scenario as we go through this. You know, upgrade all the building controls. Again, we talked about that. They'll be electronic. The automated control system, 25,000. Replace the controls. Again, that's included in our cost over there. What I would say here, so cap the additional elementary air louvers. You know, we have that kind of as something to budget for and as an immediate item. It's something that you guys might be able to just do, but I'm just putting a dollar amount in there. But it is kind of wonky that these louvers are there and they exist and they're open to the ether, and there was a purpose for them at some point, but no one can figure it out at this point. So I'm putting $100,000 in there, assuming you have to buy some things, but I don't know. Do you guys feel like you could tackle those? Yeah. Yeah, I bet you can do it for a lot less, but let's just keep that in there. So one of the items that we want to make sure that you guys consider is just fire suppression. So if we're talking about just the fire suppression system, the last budgeting we did was about $5 a square foot. But that's not accounting for miscellaneous, what could we run into? So I am trying to be worst case scenario, and I went all the way up to $12 a square foot, assuming that, because if you go in that high school, a lot of the ceiling tiles new, a lot of the lights aren't bad, right? Like you don't have to rip it all out. And part of the prior report was, well, if you're doing this, rip it all out. And in our opinions, you don't. It is a lot of work though, potentially to pull that stuff down and put it back up. So we're showing a high dollar amount for the high school. So you can see at 43,000 square feet at $12 a foot, that's about $500,000. At the elementary school, and this is just the classroom and the classroom addition. So this isn't the cafeteria or any of those spaces there. It's just the classroom areas is 35,000 square feet. So just bear with me. Just again, we like fire suppression. If you're not touching the elementary school, is it required? No. Based on what we're doing in the high school, will be required. I think that's a maybe. So let's just keep it there for now. Then, you know, we're waiting on the report, the drone analysis and all of that that's going to come in. So what we did was we just took the ICS number that was 950,000 for the high school windows. If it's anything like the other numbers, it might be grossly overestimated, but at least we have a number in there. And we will not make a decision on that until we know whether it's worth replacing them. And we will know for a fact if it's worth replacing them very soon. But again, worst case scenario, let's just keep it in there. Then, you know, you've got bathrooms. I think we think you need 2 sets of 88 bathrooms for the high school. Keeping with the theme of worst case scenario, we're saying like $800 a square foot, which is astronomical. But go ahead.
You finished it.
Which is, in our opinion, is a huge number, but we haven't designed anything. We haven't figured out where they're going to go, if they can go where they are, how you deal with the step. I mean, there's just, it's it'll be so much effort to figure that out. But, we feel like if we just leave this as a placeholder and you guys say, yeah, we want to spend money to figure that out, then we can figure that out, and this should keep us within the realm of what that should actually cost. Ideally, it would be a lot less, but we can't, I mean, it's gonna be a puzzle to figure that out. Go ahead.
On the restroom topic, my wife subbed a couple weeks ago and the third floor and second floor didn't work at all. Is that the ceramic coating, was that gonna fix why those bathrooms don't work, or why were those
Yeah,
bathrooms
yeah.
closed? Okay,
That's the one that's leaking that we're getting fixed
Okay.
next week here in June.
so you must have went with the ceramic coating, that should.
No,
No.
No,
they're replacing.
they're replacing, okay, either way, but those will be working then after that fix.
Yes, working but not accessible, which is unfortunate, right? So yeah, bear with me there. Doing some similar information, the kitchen renovation can be as elaborate as you want it to be or not, right? So if we looked at about 2,000 square feet of space, which if you look at their current kitchen and then you look at the storage, and then you look at knocking out a wall, and again, we throw a big number at that, $500 a square foot, which we don't think is realistic, but we do think would be inclusive. And then we allow them a budget of just saying, there's some equipment in there you can reuse. And, the walk-in cooler, things like, there's some big ticket items that we think would be beneficial. But for the sake of this exercise, let's just give them an allowance and say, we're gonna allow an amount. So it doesn't matter what we think is right, what they think is right. If you have X amount to spend, how do you use it best? There's two ways to design. I think we talked about this before. You design to a budget or you design to a scope, like what you need to do. It's very normal to just say, this is the amount of money you have, figure it out. And in a perfect world, you don't have to do that, but that's not the world that we generally operate in. Go for it.
Does anybody remember what the kitchen cost out of the center? They did that.
Less than 75,000. Say, they did it there.
That's pretty,
The other day.
yeah, that's pretty.
Yep. So then you can see here purposefully, electrical, and Jeremy, don't get mad at me. I just put panel and switch gear. I know that that's a gross oversimplification. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, but just they're blank on purpose.
Yeah, really the only things that I noted during our walkthrough was the age of some of the electrical equipment. Especially on the old high school or the existing high school and elementary school sides, there's a few panels that you probably wouldn't be able to get replacement breakers for. So the reason to put these in here is to do a consideration for budgeting for panel replacements. Now, depending on what happens with the mechanical systems and, some of those decisions made, you may end up having to replace some of those anyways. Same is held true for the switchgear. If you increase size of electric boilers in some of the areas, we'd probably have to do some service upgrades. The main reason though that that I would suggest looking at some switchgear replacements is the mains in existing gear are bolted pressure switches. Technically, those bolted pressure switches are supposed to be exercised. I believe it's yearly, meaning you turn them all the way off and then prime them and turn them back on. Well, that never happens because people can't just randomly shut down their buildings typically. So what we see happen is if those bolted pressure switches were to have a fault event and they open up, sometimes they won't close back in because the oil and grease that lubricated those mechanisms has become more like a glue than a lubricant, and they won't close back in. So we've actually had several high schools and elementary schools and places like that where we have done gear replacements. So it's something that we would typically recommend when we see this type of gear in there. Then our recommendation there would be to change the fusible distribution switchboards to circuit breakers.
So, we don't have a cost there, but what I want to just illustrate a little bit is that you know, I don't know, Jeremy, I mean, if we held $500,000, $1 million,
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I believe there's a couple 1200 amp services in there, if I remember correctly. I would say if you held even like 550 to 600,000 in there total, I mean, you would be we should be able to do it for most of that. Based on what I've seen for what we've done in the last 2 to 3 years on facilities.
so taking all these numbers, even understanding that we've got some placeholders, we've got, in my opinion, some large numbers that we're just protecting ourselves. I mean, in our look, and maybe anyone else on the call, if they want to chime in, I mean, we think, you know, if you're looking at $6.5 million, you can probably do the immediate things. And then we look at the items that were recommended to start budgeting for. You know, that's another $1 million, but that's not something that you do tomorrow. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a line item for your guys' cost too? I mean, that's part of this.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So right here, you'll see it's 20%. We're adding 20% for
You
design.
highlight that I must be.
No, it's just right here.
Right there.
No, yeah, it's just in there. So we had 20% for soft cost, contingency, escalation. I'm just putting 20% in there just to have a layer.
Okay.
So that you guys aren't seeing something that's not attainable. Because I don't like seeing a number and immediately knowing that it's not even real. So we don't charge 20%. You know, I think we've talked about this before. Our fees are generally between 6 and 8%, depending on the size of the project. But we think if you hold 20%, that's the right thing to do at this point. It's your money.
We as in you and the engineers?
No, we as in the school. Like in the budget, you guys hold 20% because you're gonna have bonding fees, you're gonna have legal fees, you're gonna have engineers, architects, you're gonna have contingency, you're gonna have escalation because we're not bidding it tomorrow. Yeah, and that number changes if we're talking June of next year too. I mean, this is immediate. It's not a huge number difference, but we would probably change it to 23%. So, yeah, I don't know. So Lee is part of our architectural team. You know, she'd be the project manager as it relates to all the architectural needs. So if you had any questions on that, I don't know, she is familiar with what's going on, right? But we haven't tried to scare her away by bringing her down here yet. So we're gonna wait until one more meeting maybe. Okay, you guys are supposed to laugh at that. Okay, all right. Yeah, so again, we're holding amounts for the kitchen. That doesn't have to be done tomorrow. We're holding amounts for ADA restrooms. We do think that needs to be done when you're doing this. We're holding amounts even for elementary sprinkler system. Might not have, for sure, might not have to be done, but in our opinion, it's a good thing to do. And yeah. So then comes the point of, okay, well, now what? So now what is either you guys have to decide to make some sort of recommendation to the board in about 5 days. And then hopefully stand up there when we tell the community that we're going to a vote, you know, July 31st. And the reason we're doing that is because the state's forcing our hand and not because of a crazy architect. Or we just understand that we either wait for June and then we have a vote in June at the primary. Or you look at alternate ways to fund this, whether it's the school taking out bonds, selling bonds, but understanding they have no additional revenue source. So the money's gonna come from somewhere. So there are ways that they can do that when it's an emergency, but there's no dollars they collect for it. So something's gotta give. And that's kind of the crux, is unfortunate situation that we're at.
Okay, just so I have this right in my mind. The ISIS budget, whatever they are, ISIS.
ICS, yeah.
They had an original referendum was like 14.7 million. And okay, and we're basically accomplishing all the objectives that was in that. Am I saying that right for starters? Is there things that we're leaving out?
Yes, so, you know, they replaced all the ceiling tiles, all the lights, all the grids, and I don't think that that's worth the money. I think there are
I guess
some,
my question, we're fixing all the problems
Yeah.
that we were trying to address in the first one, would maybe be, I don't care how we go about doing it, as long as we address the problems at hand that, you know,
what,
because if you throw out, I mean, this is less than half price of what the original estimate was. Am I right?
yeah,
Now, we talked a while back in a meeting or two, maybe there's some trust issues about everything. So we're adding an extra $1 million for potential sprinkler system in here. But we're still coming in less than half price of what the previous referendum was. And now what I'm trying to, in everything you've got in here, you know, the kitchen, you added $1 million. Okay, well, let's give them a budget of 500,000 and say, okay, this is what you have to work with. I as a committee member sitting here, I think this is great. But there's part of me that thinks, okay, what's the catch? Where, and now we're gonna go out and tell the public, hey, you know, we had one meeting with Icon and they cut everything in half.
Yep.
And then everybody's gonna say, and then if you throw out, okay, now we wanna pass a vote here in a week. And I don't,
They're
Yeah,
the greatest salesman in the world. They're-
yeah,
I don't need to protect myself as much as the school board and you
Yeah.
guys need to protect, like,
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, this looks great on paper. What am I not?
So what we're trying to determine with this very high level summary is, do you want us to hit the gas and try to figure this out? And that's where we would go to a food service design consultants and say, okay, $500,000, what does that get us as far as a walk-in cooler? Okay, Lee, as a member of our architectural team, you know, make sure that you can put two ADA restrooms in there. We're holding the windows. Then we would say, Jeremy, can you take a quick look at the electric? You know, what I would say though is that, you know, Prairie, Jeremy Blake, you know, his partners, Icon, we're working in like 12 districts right now. And we have, between the two firms, we probably have 150 schools to our names in the last 20 plus years. The way that ICS did it is they literally said, what's everything you should do and let's do it. We're only assuming half the piping. So we're not replacing all the piping. We're also not replacing some of the stuff in the elementary. We're also not touching locker rooms. We're not touching a whole bunch of cosmetics. We're literally, you said, you know, ADA, mechanical systems, and kitchen were your priorities. That's all we're doing.
But does it fix the problems that we have, and does it fix it for more than a Band-Aid for 5 years down the road, and then we're right back to square one here?
Cause like, wasn't that kind of ICS things like almost like a 40-year plan with it?
Yeah, I don't know, Blake, Jeremy, like, what are your thoughts? I mean,
Kind of weird question there, like, is it gonna be a Band-Aid?
it's just a different strategy. It's just, I would say the way we work is just different, but I don't know.
I think maybe, you know, from the outside looking in on it, from when we came into it, it seems that initial report, or I don't know if you'd call it a report, the initial information we looked at, it almost seemed like I would call it the nuclear option, right? Let's gut everything and replace everything because it's somewhat easier to figure out what that total cost is going to be on initial thoughts. It takes quite a bit more time, in my opinion, to come up with a lot of different numbers and try to figure out how can we best upgrade your equipment to suit your needs now and for the next, you know, 20 to 25 years or whatever the equipment is. As far as Band-Aid costs, traditionally that we stay away from all that. We're not interested in a Band-Aid that in 2 to 5 years we're going to get a phone call and say, why did we spend all this money? Because in the next 2 to 5 years, I'm still planning on being around here trying to do other schools. So that's kind of the way that we've looked at, and we take and the way we take our design approach. And Kyle can probably speak to this too. We don't build a lot of fluff into our designs. We design systems that we know are going to work, that are maintainable, and that are as energy efficient as you can afford. And that's kind of where we leave it. Does that make sense?
No solar panels in this budget, like on purpose, you know? And that's just the way we do things, and that's why we work so much with them, is because our values line up. And so, yeah, I mean, we're working in different states even with them. I mean, yeah, we can provide you references when the time comes or whenever you want. You can call other folks, but the nuclear option is the big difference.
I think if we had something that showed what the previous referendum was and what we're actually doing now, so you can see that, yes, it's not the same thing that's getting done. And we are leaving some of the other stuff off.
Yes.
So at least we could tell people, explain to them why it's not as great of a dollar.
It certainly doesn't. I mean, would you be better off if you did the ICS option in 10 years? I don't know, maybe, right? But
No, because you wouldn't have any money left.
yeah.
You're always better off spending less. Heating system, they wanted to rip out all the piping and the fan coil units in the entire school, and then they were gonna put in 4-pipe system.
Yeah.
And then put in,
Thank you.
yeah, so that would have been where the astronomical cost. And then there was.
I don't know if we needed, right?
It was, well, weren't they gonna put makeup air throughout the whole building too, along with what you just said, was, would change it.
So we need to know that when we're telling people, because otherwise you're thinking, they cut this in half, it's the same thing.
Control.
But Blake, do you have any opinions on, and I think we might have to dive deeper in their reporting, but on makeup air or switching the heating out, or?
But you're still not gonna be able to heat and cool at the same time.
Yeah, could you scroll back up to scroll back up to the HVAC? That's the one
Okay,
I
so
guess
I don't know a lot of those things. I don't do that stuff. Are we gonna get heat and air conditioning out of this? Yes,
Not at the same time.
Not, yeah.
not at the same
But-
time. So the problem in August, September, October, possibly April and May still sends the same thing. If it's 90 degrees and we haven't shut the heat off, it's gonna be 90 degrees in the rooms.
But he did say that
We're
you
putting
could do it.
controls, we're putting new controls and centralized controls,
It would
but it is
switch over.
one or the other. It still has to switch over, right, Blake?
As it sits, it does have to switch over. Yep.
So in just in the last 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago, we would have had to have, how long is it gonna take to shut the heat down? Turn the air on for 4 days of 90 degrees and all of a sudden crap, we're getting 30 below now, or 30 degrees. Now we have to shut the air conditioner back off because we have to turn the heat back on so our water pipes don't freeze. So in my opinion, all we're getting for $6 million is an air conditioner.
Wasn't the split units just a few $100,000 more and they would heat and cool?
Yeah, could you put that in that option, that 420?
I mean, yeah, it doesn't change things. I'm not sure.
Just, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so just like speaking from like a former superintendent and us having,
Well, you're muted.
oh, I said, just like from a former superintendent standpoint, and we have the same type of system below where it's either hot or it is cold. And you look at the days where you're actually affected by it compared to, cost of having it. Like this past year, like, yes, I get like the last 2 weeks have been a little bit of an anomaly. We have 100-degree weather and 95-degree weather and okay, but I think you have 2 or 3 days where you have to have some sacrificial temperature issues, right?
Yeah.
For the onset of 171 days where your kids are in school, 168 of them, they're probably comfortable, right? So if we have the same system in Beulah and every school district that has a system like that, which is many school districts. They do have those days where it's just, you shut your heat off already, but now you feel like you gotta turn it back on, but for one day they might be cold.
But Blake, if we went to that split system, we wouldn't, that would be a moot point.
You definitely not within the high school. Yeah. That's where your changeover system is. So those units can typically heat down to 20 degrees or a little less, and they prevent anything from freezing in there. Just for that one random day that you'd have.
Well,
Or
nothing's gonna,
two.
I mean, if it gets really, really cold for 2 days in May.
I think the easy way to kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, you spend the extra 150,000 roughly, say 200,000, not even that. And then you can have those split units, so the south side of the school can be running a little cooling if you need to on those hot days. But then if you do need some heat, then the other part, you can still use that for that extra 120,000 or 200,000, whatever I want to say. Or if you stick kind of with what we had for that first number, at least if you update those valves and things, you can, it's not a perfect system, but you can automate that system rather than having Bobby go and switch all those valves over twice. It can do that overnight and gradually by the morning if you do need to heat it up. Is that right? We can put a little bit of an automate. It's not going to be the golden ticket to an automated system, but it'll help a little bit if it is some 35 to 90 degree swings.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's
part of your
100% possible.
That'd be part of your $25,000 in updating controls type deal.
Yep.
With the electrical,
Yeah, and that shouldn't, like, to your point, I mean, I didn't want to try and put a number to it, but that shouldn't take 4 days to switch over. It should be over the course of a night, you use the outdoor air to try to cool off your water, and then you turn your chiller on during that next day, or vice versa. Your boiler can heat back up. You can use your electric boiler and heat that water up. It just would take a little while, but I wouldn't see it taking longer than 12 hours either way.
Does switching to the split, does that increase our electrical costs of upgrades required dramatically, or does that stay relatively the same, Jeremy?
No, it would increase your cost because we would have to run circuits out. We'd have to add circuit density, so we'd have to add panels and we'd have to run circuits out to each of the split system outdoor units. And then you'd have the cost of running the control and power from the outdoor unit to the indoor unit in each room.
Oh, I must be misunderstanding that on those splits. I thought that would be a water system split, not a mini split for those.
No, that was meant to be refrigerant. Yep. Like a condensing system. EX, direct expansion. Sorry about the confusion on that.
Oh, so that wouldn't, those air handler units, you wouldn't be replacing the air handler units with a split where the air handler units are to use the water. You'd be using an air-to-air mini split.
Correct. Yep.
Oh, okay. All right. That's where I'm off a little bit. That's why you're caught. Okay. Gotcha.
This is not replacing our boilers either, right? That would be that's above the 6.
No, that would be,
Not.
yeah, it's not replacing our boiler, correct.
So
Yeah,
our
correct.
boilers that are returning for us.
In an emergency though, they would maybe keep if it was 0 and above. That was,
And you have the backup.
I'm just saying whether we're using the split or the chiller or anything like that, this 6 million does not replace our boilers.
Correct.
are these mini splits?
Yeah. So that's where I think their confusion is. I think everybody was understanding that the air handlers right now would be replaced with like a water to air, mini split in the ceiling rather than just your conventional air to air mini split that everybody's kind of familiar with in elementary.
Or heat pump, right?
Heat pump, yeah, I'm sorry.
So then you get units.
Just
hanging
like that.
outside,
Yeah, you have to locate the 27 units outside.
So they'd be hanging on the outside of the building.
I don't know,
What
is there,
is there a price where you can do like a split unit inside and use the water system that we have? Cause that's where I was a little confused. Okay, that's what I was understanding. That's what I thought that we were talking about, not an actual.
Oh, trying to do a water to air heat pumps. I understand
Correct.
where you're coming from.
That's
there.
what I thought. So you don't, that price is not, that was never,
I don't have anything in there for that. No.
what would those? Do you have a guess on what those prices would be to switch? That'd probably be even more, quite a bit more costly.
Well, yeah, those units. Yeah, I don't even want to venture a guess at it off the top of my head. I'd have to. I think a 2-ton unit's probably $5,000 to a contractor, and then he has to install it. And then we'd have to make sure your piping system works for that. In the end, it might actually be fairly similar in cost. But that wouldn't alleviate us from the electrical side of it, though. You'd still need those would use a tremendous amount of power compared to the fan coils you currently have. So
Probably go back to the original price on that original.
but that solved the problem enough. Okay, go ahead.
We talked about, being uncomfortable a few days out of the year. Is that what the chiller, original, that 275,000, would that be what most schools would be doing? They're uncomfortable a few days out of the year. I mean, would that be normal or running a similar system?
I think that's what Blake had said at the start, is that's what we're typically using. Is that correct, Blake?
that air-cooled chiller.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are what we typically see. Those are installing those in even a new system. They're much cheaper. And you can see that looking at the costs. I mean, that thing was, what was it, 285,000 versus the 275 for the air cooled. That doesn't include a cooling tower and the systems that come with that. So those air cooled units are just more economical typically.
So
you're kind of you guys are kind of an outlier for that, because you already have a cooling tower that appears to be in pretty good shape. So
is that price right there? I didn't write it down. Is that option 2 or option 1?
That's 2.
That's the air cooled. So that's updating it too. So that,
Yeah.
I think that's.
But yeah, so I mean, again, I think is this a solution we want to spend time on for an immediate action? Or is this something where we have 6 months to figure this out, vet it? We can get a food consultant, have them draw it out with whatever's in the kitchen. I mean, it's not ideal, and we're in the situation in other districts too, where they're having to make a decision quickly because of this law. So that's my big thing is, do you guys want to go down this path leisurely or extremely fast?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear, I got the message, but what's the law that we're trying to get ahead of?
So part of the primary property tax credit is just eliminated the abilities for schools and other municipalities to do special elections.
That'd be your general and primary now.
Yeah, so after August 1st, schools, as it sits now, there's still a little bit of unknowns. We think the schools won't be able to call for a special election until, well, at all. So just for example, Jamestown, we were trying to go for honestly like an August or a September vote, and now we're escalating so that they can get the vote in. Because they don't want to wait a year.
We can have a special election, we just can't have it until primary of 26.
Yeah. It has to be on those days.
It has to be on a primary day or a general election day.
unless it's done before August 1st of this year.
Correct.
So just,
I think Jamestown's calling for, they're gonna have a special board meeting, I think like June, I think it's 5th. So that gives them enough time to actually have the election before August 31st. So like your window for calling for a vote is probably from now until June 5th, if that's the route you guys want to go.
And to be clear, we're not advocating for that. We just want you to know the facts, because I think we were all hoping that we had a few months to figure this out. And we either have a week and a half, or we have 6 months.
so it'd be my thoughts that there's no way we can go to the public and say, hey, we've got all this stuff, you guys gotta make a decision in 5 days, or 10 days, whatever it is. I guess I won't support that. The second thing is, one of the reasons I won't support that, and even maybe before we leave here tonight, because we can't have 12 different people leave this room and somebody says, well, we can fix it for 6 million, we can fix it for 4 million, we can fix it for 5. I don't care if we use system 1, 2, or 3. That's not important, because if I go tell someone that, hey, we can get it fixed for 6 million, and that same person goes, talks to Kyle, and he says 4 million, and Anna gets a call from someone and says, you know, I heard it's 7 million, that would be one of the worst things that's gonna come out of this committee. So, you know, to rush it, and I get it, I totally understand that costs are gonna go up and contractors are gonna be hard to find, and we kind of paint ourselves in a little bit of a corner. But I think when you show what you just showed here, and we're at half price of what the first referendum was, and we actually added things to it, I think we need to do our due diligence, give you guys time, give Prairie time, get everyone, so that, hey, you know, we didn't wing and prayer this, and then, well, shoot, this isn't what we wanted, and that kind of, well, yeah, we forgot about that, or this system. So, you know, I get it where you're at, but I also think
Part of the reason we brought you on too was to do the polling, right? So we can send that questionnaire out.
I agree, like we're jump starting or hijacking the entire process if we tried to do it in a week, and it will ruin the next week of Travis and I's life.
Yeah, so.
Like, but I just want you to have the facts,
Yeah.
because we cannot vote in September or October, which is what I was hoping for.
and I appreciate it, and honestly, by what you just showed us here tonight, in my opinion, that now we can go out to the general public and start having good, frank conversations, and I think you're gonna get a lot of support for something like this versus the original referendum. And if we try to go out there and more or less ram it down somebody's throat, I think you're gonna get a ton of pushback, and then we're gonna be right back in the same debacle that we were just in here a year ago.
I think we gotta know what we're talking about, why it isn't 14 million.
Well, I think a fully fleshed out comparison,
Yes.
I mean, that will take us a week just to make that one document, honestly.
Yeah.
Like,
But that would be the only fair way to do it.
yes.
And it's, I don't think it's for me to sit up at the T-stop and have 2 sheets of paper and say, hey, you know, this is what option 1 was that didn't pass, now we're in option 2. I mean, I don't, is it?
We need to know it when we're talking about it.
Absolutely, but I mean, that goes back to, we all have to be on the same page when we leave here about, okay, because it's this much less, what did we give up, or were we just getting screwed that bad by, and I don't know if that's the proper word, just, you know, like Blake said, the nuclear option versus the realistic option.
I think the biggest thing to highlight out of this too is that we will be, from our last meeting on all of our little breakout sessions, everybody that came up with something, a little 3 or 4 topics. This basically is checking every little group's box, from what I can remember.
So if you had the cash today, how long would it take you to fix the HVAC to get that part going?
How long would the part like design and then someone to come out and bid it?
To repair it, to put the new chiller and repair it.
I don't know, Blake, what's your, if we said, here's a blank check, go, how long until it's working?
Just from my understanding, because it's a little, like when multiple people talk, it's a little tough to hear. we're talking about just the chiller.
Yes.
Um, it, if things go great, it could be operational for the start of next school year, but that's going to be pushing it. And great as in like equipment lead times, is the biggest thing. I would say it's probably a 8 to 10 week build. So I would almost suggest if this is something that the school was very serious about, that you'd approach a manufacturer rep and the school would purchase the chiller just to get that out of the way and get it coming, and then bid the install work for a contractor to come and help you put it in. I've seen it done that way before too.
You're making people very happy in this room because I think that was an idea that was shared before.
So is that something that the school could afford right now and you don't have to try to get it tied on?
Nope. We just got terrible news from the state. The funding came in at 2.5. We have to cut $150,000 in our budget. And we're working on that. We just got through went through our teacher, or, getting our pay and our negotiations, and this year we are getting $79,000. Most of that is going, more than that cost is going to pay salary raises. Next year, we're expected to lose $131,000 in funding to the state. So we don't have dollars laying around.
Was it 150, you said?
We're cutting $150,000.
Is that for 26 or 27, 28?
25, 26.
25, 26.
And hopefully we can carry some over into 26, 27, but.
If we voted yes tonight, and the school board said yes, and the referendum was held, you still wouldn't be able to get that money to fix anything by this fall, correct?
We would get the money once if the referendum passes, the bond sales could happen whenever we tell them, and we would get the money at that point.
But it wouldn't fix the year over a year. The air conditioner makes sense, yeah, let's do it, but it sounds like that's not gonna. What's our orders? What do you want us to do?
I think it's slow and steady is
Keep flashing the
get real numbers.
Well, and
Real
I would say we can flesh out more, but we're not gonna, it won't get to the point where it's still always gonna be high level numbers, but I think you'll get more than one sentence in my explanation. And we can show the comparison. Go ahead.
How many of those do we have options on? Because on the HVAC stuff, I don't know. I think option 2 would make sense. You get that outside unit going, they're a lot easier to maintain and work on. So that price is rough. You want us to try to pick up some options tonight on what? It'd be a good start, so you guys know what to dig into a little bit.
I'm good with air cooled chiller too, just because it's simple and easy to maintain. He said there's people lining up to work on them.
Didn't you say we have a pretty good cooling tower?
We wouldn't need it
We wouldn't
anymore.
need it. No, but we already have it.
But the price, your price change is there's not enough of a price change to.
The cooling tower does work, but it will take a little bit of effort to get it going again.
Oh, yeah, I look at it.
All right.
You know anybody in the market for a used cooling tower? Sell it right now.
Blake, you interested?
Oh, I'm not kidding, we're not gonna use it, and it's not getting fixed if we go this other route, if you can sell that and get 10 grand. Whatever.
I'm assuming you can keep your ears open, or, I don't know, I mean, the cross section of people that wanna use tower,
I
I
was a
mean,
little,
like,
little bit joking, but
I mean,
kinda serious.
Well, at that point, we know which direction we're going.
yeah,
Well,
Yeah,
that's
then you're
fine.
committed.
Anna, do you know what the Edgeley School just did for their remodel, their kitchen and they do like a $4.2 million remodel in the Edgeley School?
Don't know, they just did a CTE.
Well, that's what I meant.
That's Valley
Yeah.
One.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sounds like he paid for a lot of that.
Yeah, there were CTE dollars and that were put in there, yeah, it was part of it, yeah.
Cause I just texted him, that they did the whole kitchen remodel project in Edgeley for $150,000. And I don't know what it entails. Obviously, we're probably not comparing apples to apples, but
yeah, I mean, we're talking about taking down walls, moving stuff. Assuming that there's probably gonna have to be some work with where's water, where's grease, where's gas, where's. I'm just, again, that's a big dollar amount, because we're assuming we're gonna do, if it's light renovations, yeah, I mean, that's $100 a square foot if we're just talking about new tile. You know, but it just depends on, again, I'm putting numbers in here to say, there's no way you're spending $12 million, like, there's just no way, like. So if you're saying, yep, let's go down this path, then one of the calls will be, okay, we got service consultants, and we say, here's the plan, give us your idea of what you think. And then they give us, you know, their thoughts. I don't know, Lee, you could chime in a little bit, I don't know, on working with food design, or if we haven't lost you.
No, I'm here. You're talking about food design, you said?
Yeah, you know, I'm assuming that, let's say we say, let's take slow and steady. We can get the current floor plans to food service and work with them on getting an estimate on what they would recommend. It's pretty typical, right?
Well, if they're not
Yes.
what we need, right?
Yep.
Very good.
Yep, we'd want a list of kind of what equipment that they already have, and just kind of understand their process there. But yeah, they could get us some good budget numbers back for that. Yep.
And tell us what the budget actually has in it.
Yes.
The bottom line is, we're not comparing apples to apples, right? Because we're not ICS, and what we're talking about now are not the same, and we can't even say that they're the same. What it is we tried for what ICS had to offer, because with the information they got from the community, the information they got from the people that are at the school, was they wanted a 40-year plan that was going to take care of all of our problems, because we knew we had these long-term things. So that's what they designed for the school, for the people, when they did the assessment and the surveys. That's what they designed. But the people said, nope, that's too much money. So now we need to look at options that the people will say yes to, but we're not going to be apples to apples. We're not going to be getting the same thing, because we don't have the money to get what ICS was designing and offering for us. But Kyle's going to help us get what will fit within our budget, even though we know it's not going to be the same thing. We're not going to get a whole new system. We're not going to get our boilers. We're not going to get that 40-year plan, you know, that we had asked for.
so number one would be my thoughts, to make something that designer that we're gonna save for, last for 40 years, to me is silly. Because 20 years from now, there's gonna be technologies and things that we don't even exist now that are probably gonna be more efficient and rated over, probably cheaper. But I don't wanna sit here and nitpick that, okay, well, you know, $1 million, let's cut that down to 500,000, let's cut this by this, let's cut this by this. What I think part of our job should be here is, like Anna, you just explained a minute ago, how you guys are getting funding cut left and right. Okay, let's come up with, go back to that 3 to 10 year deal projects. Okay, we understand that this referendum that we're going to try to get through now just addresses these immediate needs. Let's trim as much fat and as much things off some of these immediate needs, like $1 million per kitchen. Let's whack that in half. let's take that fire suppression system. I don't know, the school's been here for 100 years, and I don't want to sound sinister when I say this, but sprinkler systems don't keep kids from starting on fire. They keep the building from burning down. You know, is that something we need? I don't know. But if we can take and keep our referendum that we're passing now and add a few more of these 3 to 10 year items onto it, now as a school district, 2 to 3 to 5 years down the road, you're not having to steal money from the general fund to pay for this and that because we didn't address it now, and we don't have to cut teacher salary. I don't want to be arrogant or snide when I say that, but let's try to, instead of going with the Cadillac version and everything that we still kind of, in my opinion, still got some things on here, let's trim as much stuff off as we can so we can attack these projects that we know are looming in the weeds, and you don't have to go down the same road 5 years from now.
And I would say that, like, you know, Lee and her team, we would show you, here's where we think the restrooms would go. We would show you, okay, here's the square footage of the kitchen, and then we'd have a list of what the things are that they'd recommend, and that doesn't mean you do it all, right? You know, whether or not you can do these things and not have to do sprinkler systems, we can actually go down the path and make sure that you can do it without, or would it be required? For sure, it's not right in the elementary, but these are questions that we can fully answer if we have time.
I don't know if anybody here, sitting here, is entertaining the idea anymore that we would try to pass around, you know, go for a referendum before August, correct?
Yeah.
So we don't need to even discuss that option anymore, so. That's
That's what I was just thinking. I was just thinking that it seems like we're on the same page. So we might as well just move forward with you starting to develop this and give us these options.
Yeah.
You know, so instead of sitting here for another half an hour talking about the same stuff, let's move forward.
what I think Scott, you brought up and somebody else said, but like, what are we gonna go out and tell people? Cause everybody sitting here is gonna go home and tell somebody, so. Let's all be on the same
He's
page.
gonna develop it.
We're gonna get out there.
So, but we shouldn't be going out there saying any numbers then.
Well, I think it's fair to say that ICS had an option, so let's just steal Blake's word. It was more of a nuclear option. It wasn't wrong. It was just, they were reacting to what the community said. It was too much. Now we're being more strategic, and we think it will be less. We know it will be less, but those variables, I mean, we've already talked about what we've just looked at is already null and void, because we're already gonna put full pitch. Will it be less? Yes, less. I would say yes, or we didn't do our job. By how much and what's included, that's what you guys get to do.
That was a remodel job. This is a repair job. Well, I'm gonna tell people, because that's kind of the way I see it. What we're working towards is to repair what we have.
But I do think it's important to not focus on 6 or 5 or 7 or whatever, because we just don't know.
Well, you had some numbers in there that you were still using on there, it's because
Yeah.
you just didn't have time.
Yeah.
That's, we're not rushing it, you got time.
Oh, for sure. Yep, absolutely.
So a timeline, if the primary, and I don't know what day the primary would be, it'd be the second Tuesday, I'm just going with the 10th of June. They need 64 days, I believe, what that new bill
Yeah.
says you have to, you can't have you can't call the referendum for 64 days. So give or take, the school board would have to know a decision by March 15th to call it, and that's kind of just skirting in right at the June 10th-ish primary date. So there's a timeline. I think the school board could call it in February sometime. We called it in, I think we called it the first week of January in 2024. We had our, I think we had the vote in March 14th or 15th or something like that. And that was skirting in on 2 wheels, so just a timeline in everybody's head. January.
I would just throw in there too that, you know, you're ahead of schedule. You'll have plenty of opportunity to, you know, get the documents ready that you'd have to have for the Department of Public Instruction, because they would have to approve the project. So if you started in February, you know, with all that stuff, and then you actually had the document filled out if you wanted to go for the 2% money that the North Dakota, Bank of North Dakota has set up for school districts. So this gives you plenty of time to make sure all your ducks are in a row.
To go through that, the independent survey, that's a couple months, right? If we want to vet our plan, I mean, so that backs us into November, and then we want to vet our plan a little bit, that takes us a few months, that backs us into September. I mean, we normally take 9 months to a year to do this. It's not normal that Mandan we took a year and a half. Medina, we took 10 months, it just depends. So this actually lines up fine. I think we could have accomplished it and been done and ready in October, but that was doing that specifically to just hit that milestone so that we can bid next year. If we take that off the table, it just means we have the appropriate amount of time to not be rushed.
So you just need our approval
Well,
to have you move forward with the options that you showed us, and then you can give us more options because you can drill down a little more.
Yeah, if more options make sense, or like the things that have come up about air to air or air to water, now that we've had this conversation and Blake and Jeremy have heard a little bit about this dialogue, I think if something makes sense for them to represent something different, but I do think that we would flesh it out a little bit down a path. It'd give us an opportunity to have electrical costs, give us an opportunity to have a bathroom cost, to have a kitchen cost. Again, we were holding about half of the piping cost. Does that make sense? Those are things we gotta talk through as well.
Might quote a boiler too. Haven't had an option.
Yeah, and we got the number there, so then it's a push and a pull.
Well, I don't know much about this, so when you talk about, and maybe one of your partners can explain it to me, I guess, but so you don't have to replace everything? I just don't even understand. You can do pieces that's reasonable.
Yeah, Blake, I don't know if you feel comfortable speaking to the piping.
It is reasonable to take a pieced approach to things like this. That being said, while you're digging in, there's always the risk that you're going to find out that all your piping is one hammer swing away from just disintegrating. Probably isn't the case, but you got to start somewhere. And the other schools that are of this vintage that I've worked on, typically through the years, like the school was built in the late 40s or 50s, added onto in the 70s, and then in the 80s there was a project where they came through and replaced what they had in the original school. And then in the early to mid 2000s, they did something where they added on and then they replaced what they had in that addition that they added on in the 80s. As far as I could tell from the plans that I had, that wasn't taking place. They were just adding to it, right? Adding to the system as they went. So you could replace the piping and not those fan coils that serve your classrooms. You could do it. The connections are still there, and they have copper connections. Chances are those coils are doing just fine. If that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
I think if there's a way to sum up this whole thing is we're assuming that it's not all just gonna fall apart, as opposed to maybe before they were just more conservative and assumed it was all needed to be replaced.
Hey, Kyle, to jump in here too, I think one of the other things that Blake and I noted, and I think you and Travis noted it as well when you were there, the buildings are very well maintained. We don't always see that either. So I think that gives us a little bit better level of comfortability saying that certain things can be reused or not be replaced in the short term, and maybe that's more of a long-term solution because of the maintenance that has happened within the building.
Great point. I gushed about it, but I don't know that anyone believed me. So I appreciate you guys are saying this.
Yeah, because we we see a lot of different facilities and some are pretty good at maintenance, some are not good at all, and some are good at, different parts of the building, but not others. But it seemed like from the systems that we looked at, we didn't see any issues due to maintenance. And in fact, it appeared that everything was very well maintained from our standpoint. And I know Blake and I had talked about that on our drive home too, that it gives you a lot more like I said, we're a lot more comfortable with some of these recommendations for keeping some of that existing equipment and whatnot in place because of that.
To add to Greg's question, that piping system, because I'm naive to it as well. You say you can kind of piecemeal it together or do a little bit. I guess I would like to have it where, okay, so we initially budget 100,000 for, but yet I don't want to have it where, okay, 2 years from now, we got to budget another 100,000, 2 years we had. What is the cost of the piping system total? Maybe not so much, how can we piece it together, or do we have to, is that?
Yeah, so that's what Blake thought. It was probably about 1.25 million to 1.5 million. And that's why the 550 was kind of two chunks. Again, I might have been a little light on that, but when that was actually a specific conversation that Blake and I just had. And less than 1.5 million, and I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I don't misunderstand. We weren't recommending you piece it together. What we were saying is you do it in phases. You take one section of the building and do it, then you move to the next section of the building and do it, and you move to the next section of the building and do it. There's a few different reasons for that. One is obviously budgeting, but the second is just timelines. You have a summer, you have 3 months essentially taken out and replaced and put back in and systems tested in order to make it fun. What's that?
Just one thing to think about. So we don't have the money at hand, or we don't have the ability to pay for stuff. So if we have the bond, it's for 20 years, right? So whatever we do has to be 20 years, because our past history has shown that we can't go back and try to pass another bond, right? Because that happened when they did the high school, and then they tried to pass another one to take care of it. So it would be for 20 years. So it wouldn't be like we can do a small part now and then let's do the rest of it 3 years later and the next of it 3 years later. I think we have to look at it as the whole.
That's a good point. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
100% where I was going, because, if you had that 550 and all of a sudden, well, that was phase one, but now we got 2 more phases of it. That really skews the number that we're actually looking at, because it's an inherent cost down the road, which I was just trying to get us avoided from, that we don't run into these things.
And I think that's what we're going to look at, whether it's boilers, whether it's the completing of the piping, whether it's, I think all of the items have to be, all of these intermediate things that we're showing here, we have to either decide that they're part of this boat now, or they're not happening for 20 years. I don't know, right?
But he was suggesting that they would do it in phases over probably 3 years, but you'd have the financing in place to do it.
And that, I get the whole deal about the actual physical construction.
And I think Blake and Jeremy both weren't looking at what your building fund capacity is or all that stuff. They're just saying you could phase it, because like us, they're just saying you don't have to take the whole out, But you guys,
in our financial situation,
based on the financial situation, maybe that's the smarter thing to do, is to try to plan for it, but understanding it's not going to be done in one summer.
And it's not like we're getting a revolving note where, once we're paying interest from day one, whether you use the money or not. It's not like if we don't use it for 2 years, we're saving interest. Right? I just want to make sure that the number that we actually, like tonight, we're not going to leave with it, with our next meeting, whatever, that nobody knows, everybody knows we're not comparing apples to apples, but we also have to know exactly, maybe more definitive than what the last referendum was. We need more definitively of what we're actually getting. I think there was a lot of chattel in the community about, well, we don't even know what we're getting, and it's X amount of dollars.
Is there
Yeah,
any-
yes.
Is there anything there that we might be missing? Does the school need a new roof? That's like a big ticket.
And we'll get a validation on how effective the roof is from that analysis. It'll show each section of the roof, it'll show each window, they're doing the whole school. So that will be really, I mean, I just think that will be the next layer of information.
We know that our
We didn't-
envelopes.
We didn't have any plumbing on there.
We don't have any tuck pointing, we don't have
Have
any.
any-
And we talked about plumbing in some of our breakout sessions.
Yeah.
I guess that would be something that, I don't know if that should be on that or not. Which part of the plumbing? Is it a where do you start thing or,
Well, yeah.
or is our ceramic gonna knock her out?
Well, and they do have maintenance budget too, something that.
Yeah, so that's-
I mean, I think the goal would be that the next meeting is still not a done, like, the next meeting is just, here's your next set of things that you gotta whittle down or prioritize. Because we're not close enough to say that, like, we'll have it figured out next time.
Awesome.
Sorry, guys. Think we can move forward with this?
I don't know, I think we're on the same track, and I guess the comment earlier was how are you gonna present this to who you talk to? It's the only thing that kind of sticks in my mind is now we got, we got everything lined up. This will be our not bare bones fix, but a good solid fix that'll fix the problem.
Economical
Everybody
solution.
agreed to, and we're basically just taking off the lipstick. So, I mean, we're gonna be, something like this goes through and passes, we're gonna get some bones back where they need to be and keep rolling.
I have a question about those mini splits yet, and.
Option 3.
You gotta replace, that's the idea is there.
So Blake, just so you're aware, we're gonna asking a question about option 3, the splits.
So then you put mini splits in, I think you said every classroom in high school, right? 27 of them. So then you're gonna have those units hanging on the outside.
Or on top. And where you put them.
Yeah, I was wondering, I just.
I don't think that's the direction we're looking.
No, I don't think
We're not
looking
looking
at
at
that.
that.
You're not, okay.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so never mind. All right.
Yeah, I mean, the option 2.
So we're gonna come back with a little bit. do we
Happy
have
birthday,
somebody say
Scott.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Don't have stuff with my children.
We're,
them by.
so we're gonna come back with a little bit more information and some of the gaps. And then we're gonna spend a lot of time trying to focus on the differences. Just so that, again, it won't be complete, but we're gonna move the needle on that. Does that make sense?
I think, yeah, and the biggest one I can see that needs to get somewhat fine tuned, that people ask a lot of questions on is that kitchen. That's
Oh,
gonna be,
and
that's
that's-
gonna be probably one of the more scrutinized.
And I'll just dump that on Lee's plate. Lee, you got the kitchen?
Give us some options.
Yeah,
Optional external.
Yeah, I heard that, Kyle.
yeah. No, and we have someone we have trusted partners, just like Blake and Jeremy, that we're gonna call. We're not kitchen design experts. That's why there's big numbers in there. Okay, let's take a look at calendars.
I didn't know I had it all scheduled up for next month.
So did mine, everything was at 7:30 from our email.
7:30.
Yeah, I did see,
June 4th was my next meeting.
June 4th? June 4th,
7:30.
June 4th, 7 o'clock.
shipped into 7 now.
Are we gonna go to 7?
Isn't that what
Yeah,
tonight
seven's
was?
good.
No, because Monica sent an email every Wednesday at 7:30 was the last email I got.
5/9 is when I got that.
Yeah.
You sent one.
Yeah.
just-
Or 5/1 is
The
when I got
agenda?
that.
First, it said 7.
No.
I sent one the other day.
All right, you got it.
In your garbage.
When is the next one?
June 4th, 7 p.m.
He said we could get it on a file.
2 weeks. All right, everybody. Lee, thank you. Jeremy, Blake, really, truly appreciate it. We'll talk more. Travis, thank you. Did your son win?
There.
Yeah, they did. They won 1-0. It was a pretty good game.
Perfect. All right, awesome.
547.
547?
Somebody put something.
Okay, thank you guys.
All right, have a good night, guys.
Thank you so much.